Hello and welcome to The Agenda. I'm Stephen Cole, and this week we have a special programme to examine the aftermath of the German elections. After 16 years of Chancellor Merkel, what will a new administration mean for Germany's place on the world stage? Since taking office in November 2005, Angela Merkel has become one of the most defining figures of European, even global politics. She's been described as the glue that held the European Union together and even the chief custodian of the liberal Western democratic order. Now, after 16 years, Germany is getting a new chancellor, but what's in their inbox? And can they keep the global spotlight on Berlin? EU leadership. The European Union is losing its de facto leader, so who could replace her? French President Emmanuel Macron will have his own election to fight next spring, but some experts say France will view Angela Merkel's departure as a chance to increase its influence in Europe. Immigration. In 2015, Angela Merkel opened her borders to almost 1 million refugees, defending her decision with the phrase, "Wir schaffen das," we can manage it. This year, many of those same people took part in their first election since becoming German citizens. A reform of the European asylum system is on the cards, but while all parties agree on the need to prevent forced migration, their preferred approaches differ greatly. The same level of generosity hasn't been extended to Afghan refugees, with Germany warning other EU governments not to prompt a new migration crisis with resettlement targets. Climate change. Severe flooding across Western Germany this summer pushed climate change action into focus, and at Angela Merkel's final press conference, she admitted she'd failed to act decisively. The country emits more carbon dioxide per head than most other EU countries and relies on fossil fuels for 44% of its electricity. SPD leader Olaf Scholz wants Germany to be the world's leading hydrogen market by 2030, and with the Greens likely to form part of their coalition, a new government could help clean things up. Transatlantic ties. The next government will have to work closely with the Biden administration to smooth tensions with the US. Issues include the difficult withdrawal from Afghanistan, the recent AUKUS submarine contract with Australia, and the absence of a long-term solution to end tariffs. America also refused to allow European travelers into the country this summer, despite the EU opening its doors to US visitors in June. Relations with Russia. The Russia-Germany political relationship is at its most thorny in years and is unlikely to blossom with Angela Merkel's successor. But economic ties remain strong. Russia is Germany's second-largest trading partner and a critical supplier of natural gas. But the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline has caused geopolitical tensions, particularly with the US Congress, which thinks the move makes the EU too reliant on Russian energy. Whether it's unsolved problems or untouched opportunities, the baton has been passed. Germany and Europe's future will be shaped by new hands. Joining me now are Thomas Kielinger, one-time London correspondent for the German newspaper Die Welt, now an author, political analyst Professor Ursula Munch, and Professor Matt Quattrup, author of Angela Merkel, Europe's most influential leader. Let's start with you, Thomas. For some, the German election campaign was a damp squid. Nothing much happened, and all we're seeing is a return to more coalition politics. How do you see the election?
Well, the problem was that we have had a grand coalition in Germany for 4 years, and the grand coalition is a sleeping pill for the political mind of contemporary Germans. They are always agreeing in the center ground on the lowest common denominator, and the figures that emerged for the election campaign did not fire people's imagination a lot. The campaigner for the Christian Democrats, Armin Laschet, was a bit of a no-show sort of figure, rather lacking in any kind of characteristic charisma. And besides, the German populace is so splintered in their political alignment and alliances, it is very difficult to see a common center of a national opinion that would emerge. And so the fact that the society is so atomized produced a sort of variety of candidates, which none of them in their own time were able to fire people's imagination much.
And Professor Matt Kortrup, same question to you, and added a sort of rider. What does this election say about the state of German politics?
Well, Germany is a consensus state more than a majoritarian system. So in Britain, it's very much if you win, you take everything. The British system is called North Korea with elections. Whereas in Germany, it's much more consensual. You have, except for one period in German post-war history, always had coalitions. In addition to the coalitions, you have to iron things out with the Länder, the states. So there's always a bit of a model in Germany. And so I think, in a way, that's just how the system works.
Professor Munch, Germans, are they waking up to a very different political landscape? Or indeed, from what our two previous guests have had to say, are they waking up at all to this election? It doesn't seem to have set Europe alight.
I don't think that there might be so many changes. So we already heard it. So the main characteristic of Germany is to have coalition government. And one of the other main characteristics is to have a federal system. And so we have, of course, we have a change, and we don't know until now who will lead the government. So, and we will have, of course, other persons in government. There is a change. But on the other side, we will see those parties in government we already had in the past, and we already had on the level of the Länder and the subnational level. So there will be a change, but it's like always in Germany, it's a moderate change, and it's a change. It's no stop and go policy or politics like you had in Great Britain in former times, but it's always the German model to see progress and to see reforms, but quite slowly and in a certain way, always together with the Länder. Not only the federal government has to be seen, but also the Länder government. And there we had already nearly every coalition, every sort of a coalition. We have 16 Länder in Germany with 13 different ways of forming a coalition. So we are nearly used to everything.
Well, if I may add here, Stephen, what Professor Munch just said, it's quite true. I'm trying to tell British audiences that Germany doesn't have one government, it has 17 governments. Mm-hmm. It has a national government, Berlin, and then it has 16 Länder governments. That's bad enough for the image of Germany as a united sort of profile. But what is worse, and which I think is important as we wake up now, is that for the first time since the end of the war, we'll have a tripartite coalition. We will have a government with 3 different parties. And whether that is going to add to the profile of Germany, I very much doubt, because you will have to find consensus between these 3 parties. We are who are all 3 at different loggerheads, as it were, at different political ends. And so that, I think, is a diminution of Germany's sort of power profile in the world. To have to form consensus between 3 diverging parties is a terribly difficult art to perform. And first of all, it's going to lead to endless coalition talks, and Germany will be in purdah, as I predict, for months to come until they have form a government. That in itself is not going to help the position of Germany in the world.
Professor Munch, picking up on what Thomas has just said, was Angela Merkel the glue that held it all together?
She has great ideas of how to build up and how to change Germany politics with regard, for example, to European politics, what to do after the Brexit, how to react. And so I think, of course, Germans are missing the big ideas for the future. And that's, of course, we see when we have a look at the voting results and about the results of the different groups of age having taken part at the election. So we have a big difference when we have a look at the younger voters below 25. And when we have a look at them, whom they voted for, they voted not only for the Greens, but also for the Liberals, for the FDP. So the biggest, best results with regard to the younger voters got the Liberals and the Greens. I think that was very interesting also for the whole public and for the parties to learn this lesson that the younger ones, they want to see other types of parties and another type of politics.
And the real picture, I think, that you have to look at is that 75% of German voters will not be behind whoever emerges from the coalition government and be the new Chancellor. And the old catch-all parties, the so-called Volksparteien, just managed 1/4%. And the young voters, that Professor Munch addresses, voted for 15% also the Greens, or to 11% for the Liberal Democrats, which is not a huge percentage of the popular vote. I think I'm just left with this uncertainty where Germany's direction in the world lies when 75% of voters.
But we should note that we have, of course, we have a totally different election system than Great Britain.
Yes,
so please note that that's quite normal for Germany. Of course, in former time, 1960s, 1970s, we only had 3 parties. 2 of them were very, very big parties. We have a changed party system, but of course, we have another society and we have a proportional voting system, and that's of course something else. So don't make such a big fuss about this different majorities. So we will get used to this. That's quite unusual now.
Well,
but of course, the advantage is we don't have anymore this old man making old party politics, but we have now this chance and this necessity that party politics in Germany will change with regard to a totally different German society.
Well, regardless of how it changes, Professor Kortrup, Angela Merkel ruled through coalitions for 12 of her 16 years in office. Can you see another strong leader emerging in her place?
Well, I think it's conceivable that it will be Olaf Scholz will be the new Chancellor of Germany. He's been the finance minister for 4 years. Many of the economic policies that she sometimes has taken credit for are the ones that were implemented more or less by him. So I think he could provide stability for the next few years. Now, he is not a very young man, and he is in his early 60s. And I think it's going to be interesting to see who could be that sort of leader in the future. But I think Scholz, at least for the time being, will carry on and do things that will provide stability.
Thomas, just watching and following the election very closely, there seem to be economic issues seem to play a huge part, but almost nothing about foreign policy. Is that how you read it?
It is indeed amazing when you consider the considerable clout that Germany has as the biggest country within the EU, that foreign policy played such an important part in the election. I think it shows that in the world as a whole, societies tend to look at their own navel. There is a great deal of navel going on. Domestic politics sort of takes center stage, as it were, particularly in the splintered society that we talked about before, with so many varying sort of directions of views. But that will change. One thing, of course, you have to remember why foreign policy doesn't have to be talked so much about is we are governing in multilateral sort of fashions. We are a member of the EU. We are a member of the Brussels system. So we act collectively. We also like to act collectively in terms of relations with China. and in relations with Russia. And there is no consensus at the moment to be had in Europe or anywhere else how these relations should go. So there is a sort of an impasse in the general direction of world politics. And that impasse, I think, leads to the society as a whole looking more at its domestic problems. But foreign policy will emerge, whatever direction the government will take. They just have to find a consensus amongst themselves, amongst the three parties which will form a government, before they can emerge as a new player in world politics. Until then, we will be a party to collective leadership in Europe.
Well, let's pause there for a moment, but still to come here on the agenda. International relations. We'll be discussing Germany's future political pathway. And welcome back to the agenda. Let's continue to consider the fallout from the German elections and life after Angela Merkel. Still with me are Thomas Kielinger, one-time London correspondent for the German newspaper Die Welt, now a political and historical author, political analyst Professor Ursula Munch, and Professor Matt Kortrup, author of Angela Merkel, Europe's most influential leader. Let's talk about European politics, because Mrs. Merkel had pretty much shaped the EU responses to the Eurozone bailouts, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Brexit. So, Professor Munch, do you think Europe is apprehensive about her departure?
No, I don't think so. So I think that most of them know that we will have a stable government and there will be not so many changes in foreign policy or in in European policy. Of course, we might see some different aspects when we will see the Greens as a member of federal government, and they have a certain different position with regard to human rights politics, and we will see changes with regard to the politics with regard to China as well as to Russia. There will be a certain difference, but this difference, as Thomas Kielinger mentioned, so we always act, or normally we act being part of the European Union. We act as a part of European Union with regard also to the USA, with regard to China and Russia. So I don't see so many changes, and I always still see that we have this leadership position of Germany, because this position inside European Union, that doesn't depend on the person who is governing in Germany. It depends on the position of Germany inside European Union with regard to the population, with regard of the strength of the economy, and it doesn't depend on the person who is governing.
And Thomas, Angela Merkel's, should we say, close relationship, or relationship anyway, with Vladimir Putin, did it damage her politically, especially Nord Stream 2? And second part of the question, what will the Greens have to say about that?
Well, the Greens are rather critical of the Nord Stream 2 gas deal with Russia, which is interesting because Angela Merkel so staunchly defended it. She actually even defended it in America, to the extent that eventually the current US President Biden agreed to sort of bury, as it were, the hatchet and no longer oppose the Nord Stream gas line. It'll be interesting how the Green and the Christian Democrats will agree on this. It will obviously be built. It is is continuing. It has caused a great deal of disconcertment in Europe because she acted rather unilaterally in this case. It was a bilateral deal between Germany and Russia. It was not sort of collectively arrived at in the European councils. And that's an interesting thing about Angela Merkel. People think that she is a sort of steady as it goes politician who waits until the dust settles and then decides. She has done some remarkable unilateral decisions. She unilaterally abrogated atomic power in Germany. She unilaterally opened the borders to refugees 6 years ago to come to Germany. And she unilaterally agreed with Vladimir Putin on this pipeline.
And all of these decisions made without the permission of Brussels?
Well, shall I say, sort of a nodding agreement, which wasn't a real hard-written agreement. They went along with it. And as Professor Munch said, Germany is a power player of its own right because of its importance as a country in Europe. So you can't possibly sort of stop it, as it were, in the tracks. But you have to be a more willing partner in future to Germany to talk to European partners, European membership countries, to find collective decisions on these matters. And so the pipeline, I think, is too far gone to be stopped. I do think it will be built and finished. The result of which, whether it gives Putin a new power hand, as it were, to play in Europe, we will have to watch very carefully. Also about Ukraine, how Ukraine will fare, because there's a pipeline going through its territory and so forth.
And it doesn't like that deal at all.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Professor Kortrup, EU leadership, climate change, immigration, NATO, relations with Russia. What's the big priority for a new chancellor when one becomes a new chancellor?
Well, I think in a way it's all of the above, and I think that's the tricky thing about being chancellor. You can't just pick and choose. You can't just be one thing. And if you just try to be one thing, then you end up as a failure. We had in the early 1960s, we had Ludwig Erhard, who was the most eminent economist of his generation, the economic politician. And it was an absolute failure when he became chancellor because he only knew one thing. And I think the tricky thing about being a politician is that you have to be a jack of all trades. And Merkel has, in many ways, been successful because she's somebody who's not an expert. She knows very little about economics. She knows very little about law. She knows very little about those things that politicians normally know about. And therefore, she has relied on good advisors. I think they've once said that the greatness of a politician is measured by the quality of his or her advisors. And I think that's
she's had pretty much the same team for a very long time, hasn't she?
Yeah, mostly sort of women, and they were sometimes known as the Spice Girl or the Spice Girls.
Professor Munch, not talking about the Spice Girls, but you mentioned Germany. Thomas mentioned Putin. And what about China? What are relations likely to be going forward with China, between Germany and China?
So, of course, China, that's, of course, an issue. It depends not only from foreign policy, but, of course, it's also economic policy. So that... the
new European Union deal with China, which seems to be on the back burner.
Yes, so we will always have this discussion that we, of course, need very good relations to China with regard to the economy. On the other side, of course, we have a discussion in Germany that we should not always look at our export to China, that we should always have in mind that the biggest part of German economy is the rest of the European Union. So we will see this balance, that we will have an big interest, also the next government, to have good relations to China, not only with regard to economics, but with regard to this, that we of course try to have this balance. Of course, the United States will always be the most important partner of Germany. So we will never stop to see this. So we will see how they will balance it. And I think the relation, they will not become better to China. I don't think that they will become worse, but we will not see an improvement because we see this need to have a good relation to the United States. We will see, of course, that we have a very big interest with regard to economics, with regard to other European countries and the other member states, and we will see this way of balancing it. And of course, the Greens becoming members of the federal government, they will become very, very restrictive, perhaps not very, very restrictive, but become more restrictive with regard to your human rights politics. So we will see the attempt to make an arrangement and a balance of all these things: human rights politics, economic interests, interest with regard to United States. So that will become more difficult.
And if I may just add one little footnote about China, it also depends on which direction China will travel in future. I mean, Churchill once famously said about the old Russia, it's a riddle inside an enigma wrapped in a mystery. You can say that about China too. Look at this recent decision by Xi Jinping when he said that he will no longer support the building of coal mine plants abroad. That is a very positive sort of turn of events. So we're hoping that China too will become a more accommodating power when it comes to solving some of the big global crises, and most importantly, the economic one, the environmental one.
And Professor Kortrup, as we move towards the end of this show, Merkel's classic slogan for voters during her campaigns was always, "You know me." But did they know much about Angela Merkel? What will her legacy be? What will she be remembered for? Briefly, if you will. And I'll ask the same question to Thomas and to Professor Munch.
I think she'll be remembered as being the symbol of stability and liberal democracy and all of those values. I'm not necessarily sure that she was that. When Trump won the election, Barack Obama went to Germany, pleaded with her to take another term. She was going to step down in 2017, and she accepted that. But she's been seen as a symbol of being sort of the anti-Trump, and I think she'll be remembered as that in the world. And being a safe pair of hands, which is a good thing.
Okay, Thomas?
Yes, I agree. Safe pair of hands, continuity, but also Chancellor without a strategic sort of a particular vision. Not a single important speech will be remembered about what she said. She governed by spreadsheet, as we heard before, but she governed sort of solidly, and she was a symbol of the quiet Germany and the peace and prosperity that people hanker for. That will be gone. We are looking at a more uncertain future now.
Professor Munch?
Somebody very powerful, of course, but also a woman who decided when she will end her own political career.
Many thanks to you, political analyst Professor Ursula Munch, Thomas Kielinger, one-time London correspondent for the newspaper Die Welt, now author, and Professor Matt Kortrup, author of Angela Merkel, Europe's most influential leader. She certainly has been. Thank you all very much indeed for appearing on the agenda. So, after what was an inconclusive vote, Germany is likely to face a three-party coalition for the first time in its post-war history. Germany, of course, is used to coalition politics. Angela Merkel ruled for 12 of her 16 years in coalitions. Absolute majorities are rare under Germany's proportional representation system, but no party has ever faced forming a government with as low a share of the vote. And the big question now is that with such poor domestic support, can Angela Merkel's successor dominate the international stage in the way she did? Well, anyone in the EU, especially perhaps in the Élysée Palace in Paris, hoping that Germany's dominant role in Brussels may diminish with a new leader in Berlin, is likely to be disappointed. As Professor Ursula Munch told me, future leadership of the EU doesn't depend on the Chancellor in charge. It depends on the position of Germany inside the EU. But during the election campaign, the clearest dividing line between the parties was the economy, and there was intense debate on the future direction of Europe's fiscal policy. Should, for example, the European Union aim for a fully fledged fiscal union or return to the austerity policy that shaped the continent in the past decade? On the one hand, the conservative CDU, CSU and the liberal FDP parties supported the so-called Frugal Four, a coalition of fiscally conservative states, which includes Austria, the Netherlands, Denmark and Sweden. The Social Democrats, the Greens and the left are sympathetic to the views of France, Spain and Italy, who are currently pushing for reform of the EU's fiscal rules and a relaxation of EU efforts to reduce public debt levels. Germany's stance on the debate after the election will not just shape the post-pandemic recovery, but the future of the EU fiscal policy for years to come. Germany faces a period of political uncertainty and choppy waters to navigate in terms of German relationships with Russia and China, as well as climate change. The new coalition and the new Chancellor will have a full agenda when they take over later this year. Don't forget you can watch everything from past Agenda episodes and find additional exclusive content on our website, cgtn.com/Europe, or on our YouTube channel. And of course, you can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, @CGTN Europe. Coming up on a future agenda, COP15, can a virtual biodiversity summit make real decisions to save the planet? But for now, from me, Stephen Cole, and all the Agenda team here in London, it's goodbye.